All right, we are back Wednesday, December 20th. Another day of good hoops action. Hunter, after another good night for us from a betting perspective last night, moved to 3-0 on the day. For me, that moves it to 35-19, the high water mark so far on the season. We'll see if we can keep that going a little bit later in the show. But some thrilling action last night. One of them, obviously, we had eyes on because we had some action on Florida -3. That game with Michigan was entertaining from start to finish.
Yeah, I don't think we deserve that one, but happy to get it in double overtime. Florida continues to show flashes of being really good, but they're just not putting it together yet. One thing they are doing, though, is they're dominating the offensive glass. So all these bad shots they're taking that aren't falling, they're scooping up a lot of them and getting second chance opportunities, just rotating through those bigs that they have. Bringing Alex Condon off the bench is super impressive. He's sitting behind Samuel and I think he's Hangeldort or so yeah, Florida's got the bigs. A win's a win come selection Sunday. So Florida's just got to hold serve on these two bye games they have coming up, and then they're going to be 10-3 headed into conference play. Michigan, on the other hand, it's unraveling on them a bit. Like they have a consistent theme of being up in basketball games and not being able to finish them. They've been right there in a lot of these games. Then coming down the stretch, they're just not playing good defense at all. They're like bottom 200 plus in a lot of the key defensive categories. So Michigan's got some things to work on headed into Big Ten conference play.
Yeah, and they also get a little bit one-dimensional with Doug McDaniel up there. He got off to a great start to that game. He's so quick, so elusive that even though you know he's going to be doing what he does, he's tough to stop. But I think Florida, Todd Golden did a nice job of at least doing enough to slow him down. Ended up putting Clayton on the bench for most of that game because of his defense, I think, and they had Poland out there. But yeah, I really like this Florida team. They're inconsistent, but that's, I think, partially due to so much of those players coming in the transfer portal, and Todd Golden even talked about that a little bit. I think they're obviously going to face tough tests on almost a nightly basis in the SEC. But if they can have a middle of the road SEC season, that's not the type of team you're going to be wanting to play in March due to the combination. They can beat you in almost every way on the offensive end. Then it's just a matter of getting enough stops.
Yeah, there's no question that Florida has the talent. It's just putting it together. And like you mentioned, ended up taking Walter Clayton off the court down the stretch there. They're saying it was offense, defense on the broadcast, but Walter Clayton was their big get out of the transfer portal. He's their star player, so they need him on the court if they want to go as far as they can go.
Indeed. And yeah, that was a great game. And then we'll do a little report card here in a second. We'll talk about Marquette a little bit more, but we talked about the challenge of going to these road environments in the Big East, and we'll talk about that a little bit more here with the games of the day. But that's now twice that Marquette has gone on the road against strong defensive teams and really wasn't competitive. That game was a Providence lead pretty much from start to finish. Kolek played fine, in his return there, but the rest of the Marquette team, when those wings, Jones, I think, and who's the 22, the guard,
both Jones, Sean
yeah,
Jones and Cam Jones.
yeah, both Jones, when they're not able to drive and get into the lane and do stuff, which Providence did a nice job of just keeping guys on the perimeter, the Marquette offense gets kind of stagnant. And then Providence, I mean, we'll talk about Oklahoma a little bit later. That was a game that, it almost looks even better for Oklahoma with how well they handled this Providence team. But Providence continuing to, we've talked about, there's that top tier, which now I think is clearly just UConn, and we'll see how they play today against Seton Hall. But that Creighton, Providence, Villanova, Marquette, even Butler, all of those teams, it's starting to be like whoever's the home team in those games, you've got to like to win it.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the story of the Big East this year. It's just going to be home teams taking advantage of their home court. I mean, Providence looks good. Providence looks like a tournament team, and that's helpful for the Big East. I think the Big East needs one of these other teams other than, I think Creighton, Marquette, and UConn, of course, are obviously safe. But the Big East needs another team to step up if they want to be a 4 or 5 bid league. And they're, Villanova's kind of struggled. We don't know what Butler is. I think they're sitting at 10-2, but not really any good wins. So kind of looking at Butler, Providence, Xavier to see who can be that next team to be a conference team come selection Sunday.
Absolutely. And we didn't talk about it yesterday. We said we'd save it for today. So let's get into it. Just a couple of the games over the weekend. Obviously, Purdue against Arizona was the marquee game. on Saturday. And Fletcher Lawyer, I think he took it personally. We called him out before the game. He did have a couple of the plays where he just throws it right to the opposing team. But for me, obviously we know what Edey is for Purdue. He's one of the best college basketball players of the last decade.
Yep.
Braden Smith has taken a gigantic leap. He's, to me, a top 3, top 5 point guard in the entire country. Off the high pick and roll ball screen, his pull-up jumper is pure. I mean, it's almost every single time if he gets a clean look off that high pick and roll, it's going in. And then it really comes down to what Fletcher Lawyer brings to the table. When he's hot like he was for most of this game, Purdue's effectively unstoppable when all 3 of those guys are going, in my opinion.
Yeah, there's no one in the country that was going to beat Purdue when they're playing that well. When Purdue's playing inside out through Edey and they're getting Braden Smith and Fletcher Lawyer open, at the end of the day, if those guys are going to make those shots, Purdue's going to be unbeatable because Edey's going to dominate you in the paint in single coverage. And if you send a double and Fletcher Lawyer and Braden Smith are shooting it at 40% from deep, there's just no way to beat that team. I don't really look at Arizona any differently after this game. I thought they still showed well. I thought they still played well. They just ran into a Purdue team that was shooting the lights out, and no one in the country was going to beat them on that day. I think if the 2 teams played again, you just have to feel like water finds its level and like Purdue might come down to earth a little bit. But yeah, Purdue looked amazing. Purdue looked like the number 1 team in the country. I mean, I haven't even seen UConn look that good this year. What Purdue did to Arizona, they almost hung 50 on them in the first half. Like, they were moving the ball well and they couldn't miss.
Yeah, and I think for me, for Arizona, I mean, he's been great for them most of this season. Pella Larson struggled in that game for Arizona. And for me, it was like him against Lawyer was obviously a key matchup there. They were guarding each other for most of the game. And both teams, because neither of those players are exceptional defensive players, they were kind of going at each other a lot. And obviously Lawyer got the better of him there, but certainly possible that we see these teams playing a meaningful game come March. And I agree with you. Arizona goes to effectively play a road game there against Purdue. Got kind of boat raced out of the start with Lawyers shooting. They did battle back nicely in the second half, got it close there. But then a guy we haven't even talked about yet steps up, Lance Jones, with some big shots there for Purdue. And then they just bring guys off the bench too. Mason Gillis, Ethan Morton first can come in when Edey needs a break or gets into foul trouble. There's no weaknesses in this Purdue team. I can't fathom. I didn't see the game. I don't understand how they lost to Northwestern. But going forward in the Big Ten, every single night, Purdue should be a 4+ point favorite against pretty much every team they're going to play the rest of the season.
Yeah, I think this team will be favored even on the road. I mean, when they have it going, they're right there with UConn for the best team in the country. And also, I'm still going to keep Arizona up in that tier. If that game was played in the Footprint Center in Phoenix, like, you could have seen it going the other way.
Indeed. And let's just get into our report cards here, because we've got finals week going on or coming to an end for most of the students. Conference, non-conference play kind of coming to an end here. We got conference play kicking off in most conferences either this week or right around the turn of the calendar. And I bring it up now to start with because I'm going to start with the team that right now is number 1 in the VCI, and that is the Houston Cougars. They are 11-0, and I'm starting with them because when we're looking at the games from this weekend, they played Texas A&M, and that was a game we talked about ahead of time where we thought Houston should handle business rather comfortably, and it looked like they were going to for most of that game, and then Texas A&M rallies late to make it competitive. What is the report card for this Houston team? Obviously, they're 11-0. Their best win coming over number 24 in the VCI. That was just the last game there against Texas A&M. But there's people questioning, their schedule versus some of these other top teams. Obviously, Purdue, Arizona, UConn, all those teams have gone and played tough competition. But give me a grade for this Houston team and your current kind of feeling of them heading into their first season in the Big 12.
The Houston Cougars get an A. I mean, if you win every game on your schedule, you're doing every assignment, you're getting an A. The thing keeping them from an A+ is they don't have that extra credit. They haven't gone out and got a top 10 win. No fault of theirs. It hasn't been on their schedule. I think maybe Kelvin Sampson next year could look at adding some bigger games in the non-con. But you get an A if you're 11-0 and you're the number 1 team in the country, according to the computers.
Yep, and as we've talked about, that obviously spurred by their defensive side of the ball. They beat Texas A&M 70-66, which that's kind of the score you expect Houston to win by in some of these games against top level competition. But yeah, I'll agree with you. They for me, if they had lost that Texas A&M game, they could have quickly dropped down into the B minus, even C plus range, but they didn't. So, like you said, they checked all the boxes on the assignment. They got the answers right. It wasn't. They maybe didn't show their work to the level that we would have liked to see, but yeah, we'll give them the A there for sure. And they'll soon enough start. Honest, their first test is going to be January 9th. They're going to go to Iowa State. So that'll be their first test. Two strong defensive teams. Looking forward to that one in early January. And then they don't play. They only play Baylor once. And then they've got Kansas, but they don't play Kansas till February. They'll play BYU once as well. So this Houston schedule honestly doesn't even become that. It's obviously going to be difficult in the Big 12. Every game in the Big 12 is going to be tough, but they don't see some of the top teams multiple times. So I like Houston's chances of being very high on the seed line come March Madness.
Yeah, they're looking like a 1 seed to me.
Up next, the team we were just talking about, the Purdue Boilermakers. They do have that one blemish on the resume, that loss to Northwestern, which is a transitive loss now to Chicago State because Chicago State beat Northwestern. So again, I don't understand how that happens. Does that affect your report card on them at all?
Purdue gets an A+ for me. They dropped that game to Northwestern, but they go and they've picked up so much extra credit. What they did in Maui was sensational. The win over Arizona. I mean, they played the hardest non-conference schedule in the country, and they just rolled through those teams. Yeah, they dropped a game to Northwestern, but it's a road game. It's hard to win on the road in college basketball. We've seen that, especially to start this year. True road teams are just cleaning up. So I still got Purdue with an A+ because of the non-con. They're looking like a 1 seed. They're looking like a Final Four team.
Absolutely. And we just see it, I'm on the stats page here on cbb.vincerics.com, and you sort by average win just to kind of get a sense of who teams are beating. So far, still in first in the average win, Alcorn State. They're 1-11, but their lone win coming over Xavier. So they have an average win of 49. So at some point, Alcorn State will win again, and they'll drop down here. But then next step after that is Purdue, average win of 70.2, and then it's another 30-point gap to Memphis at 104.4, and then it really tightens up there. So just far and away the best results through the non-conference. And I agree with you. We're not going to fault them for that Northwestern game. And honestly, I don't think Purdue ever was going to go undefeated, especially with this schedule. You would have expected if they were going to go undefeated or they were going to suffer losses, it would have been to one of these other top teams they were playing. But having a little blemish, I don't think actually is a bad thing for them. That's one of those where you definitely wouldn't want to go into March Madness with some sort of crazy long winning streak. So even if they drop a game or two the rest of the season in the Big Ten, nothing to be concerned about there for Purdue. We'll skip over Arizona. They're going to play Alabama today, so I think we need to see a little bit more from them before we can give them a final grade on the non-conference. UConn, though, they're kicking off conference play tonight against Seton Hall. Their lone loss coming to Kansas. This, for me, is going to be another team that gets an A, maybe even an A+, just because you factor in the coming off the national championship. Would have been easy to kind of get your head too big or whatever, but Danny Hurley clearly has this team focused and ready to go. And for me, it's been one of the most impressive coaching jobs of the season so far.
Yeah, I think they're a jump shot in Allen Fieldhouse away from an A+. I'll give them an A. That win over Gonzaga in typical years, that would move them up to an A+ for me, but we've seen Gonzaga really isn't Gonzaga years past, especially dropping that game to UW. I know it was in Climate Pledge, and there's nothing wrong with A. Like, UConn's doing what we're expecting them to do, and I fully expect them to win the Big East and be on the one line.
Let's go to a team. That's, I think, an interesting one. They're number 6 right now in the BCI. They've been sliding up slowly but surely with wins. That is Tennessee. They're 8-3. All of those losses coming against good teams. They, of course, were down in Maui with Purdue and Kansas. They lost both of those games, and they went on the road and lost to North Carolina in a game they got off to a terrible start and then kind of battled back in that one. Since then, they took care of business against Illinois at home. They went on a neutral site, beat NC State. We know what Dalton Connect is for them. That's a new piece on offense they haven't had in previous years. This defense looks like the Tennessee defense of previous years, maybe actually a step below, I think, some of these top Rick Barnes Tennessee defenses. But what's the grade for this Tennessee team as they have a couple cakewalk games before they kick off conference play against an currently undefeated Ole Miss team to start the year in SEC play. But what's the report card and grade for Rick Barnes and these Tennessee Volunteers?
The Tennessee Volunteers get a B from me. They have good wins. They've looked good. They haven't gone out and got 100% on their toughest assignments. They've dropped those, but they're a B for me. They look good. They're not in that top tier of college basketball, but they're right there. They're on the 3-4 line. I think they have the opportunity to move up with wins in SEC play. They've looked good. They haven't looked great.
Yeah, I agree. Couldn't have said it better myself. They also had that win over Wisconsin that looks better and better. They got that very early in the season, second game of the year. They went and won at Wisconsin, which at the time seemed like, oh yeah, they're supposed to beat Wisconsin. But now I think if Tennessee was going to play Wisconsin tomorrow, I don't know who I'd pick in that game. So that is a feather in their cap as well. But yeah, you would have liked them to maybe sneak one of those between the Purdue, Kansas, North Carolina. They had one of those, and this is a great non-conference for them. Instead, they're going to need to do some work in SEC play if they do want to be a top seed in the tournament, but they've got the pieces to do it. And I think this defense may improve as the year goes on just because they add Connect because they need that offensive piece. He may not bring the same level of defensive tenacity that Tennessee has historically. So that might need some time to blend together. But when you're number 6 in the VCI at this point of the season, absolutely nothing to be concerned about. Another team we're going to talk about here because they've got a big game tonight, but that is Creighton. Creighton remains at number 7 in the VCI. They have suffered a couple of losses that I would not want to see Creighton suffering. Those to Colorado State, which isn't Colorado State's fine this year. They're in the 20s in the VCI, but then that loss semi away to UNLV a couple days ago, not great. They bounced back. They beat Oklahoma, so either they beat Alabama. So that win over Alabama is really their only marquee victory. They did win at Nebraska by 29, and that Nebraska team's looking a little bit better as the season goes on, but what's the grade for Creighton? And do you factor in that they were so highly touted coming into the season into this grade, or are you going to give them just a straight up, this is my assessment without any preconceived notions in there?
Creighton gets a B- for me. I think that maybe the expectations were a little high for this team coming into the season, and they did suffer that tough loss to UNLV that almost drops them to the C+ range, but they bounced back. They look really good against Alabama, and they've been taking care of business in their other games. They've looked the part. The computers still love them. If you're number 7 in the VCI, I don't think you can be below a B-. But they're towing that line just because they haven't lived up to the expectations. But if you strip those expectations, they're still looking like a very solid basketball team.
Yeah, I think that's a totally fair grade for them. They obviously kind of go as Trey Alexander goes. If you're able to stop Trey Alexander, then you're able to stop Creighton. It'll be interesting to see. We'll talk about it here in a few minutes. Their game against Villanova this evening. They're big favorites in that game against Villanova, but it's Big East play, and in this Villanova team, obviously, I don't even know what grade I'd give Villanova. They've had games where they look like an A. They've had games where they look like an F triple-. So we'll talk about that game here in a second. But yeah, I think that's a fair assessment of Creighton. Let's talk about number 9 in the VCI, a fellow Big 12 team that goes along with Houston and BYU. BYU has moved all the way up to number 5 in the VCI right now. So excited to see what they do come conference play. But Kansas, bringing them up because they started the year. A lot of people had them as the number 1 team in the country to begin the season. They have suffered just that one loss to Marquette, which we'll talk about Marquette here in a second, but that's a game that you'd expect Kansas to win if they were, the top 1, 2, 3 team in the country to start the year. But they've also got some great victories. They've beaten Tennessee. They've beaten Kentucky, which looks increasingly impressive. They beat UConn at home. They battled back against Indiana this weekend. That looked bleak for them for quite some time there in Assembly Hall, but they get the job done. We've talked about this Kansas team a fair amount. They kind of go as DeJuan Harris goes. McCullough's fantastic. Dickinson's fantastic. KJ Adams is good. They've got a great starting 5, but maybe not quite the start to the season that, but the results aren't bad, but it hasn't looked like the number 1, number 2 team in the country. So what's the grade for Kansas? And also kind of how do you feel about them going into Big 12 play?
The Kansas Jayhawks, their resume gets an A-, their eye test gets a B. This team came in, was it the number 1 team in the country coming into the season? They've picked up the wins that they need to pick up to stay right there on the 1 or 2 line. but they just haven't been passing the eye test. They've really struggled, and it's really just coming down to DeJuan Harris. When DeJuan Harris is on, Kansas can play with anyone in the country. When DeJuan Harris isn't on, they're going to struggle to compete in that top tier. And by on, it means when he's willing to take shots and be a play, like he's such a good playmaker passing the ball, but it gets more difficult when he's not willing to shoot, especially from outside the 3-point line. He's at his best and Kansas at their best when you have to respect DeJuan Harris's shot because he's so surgical when he can get into the paint and set up the KJ Adams, Hunter Dickinson, set up Kevin McCullough from the outside.
Yeah, it's a team. I guess quickly, who we've talked. We do this a lot, but right this second, favorite for you going into Big 12 play to win the conference?
Houston.
All right. Yeah, I think for me, Baylor was up there, but that Michigan State game was concerning. We'll talk about them against Duke here in a little bit. I'm still gonna lean Kansas. I think we'll see how they play against Houston. Those are going to be great games. I think the last game of the year in the Big 12 is Kansas against Houston, so it could come down to that final game. And then we've got this wild card of BYU. I don't think they're going to have what it takes to win the conference, but they'll be tough to beat no matter what. And then this Oklahoma team, who we'll also talk about in a second, they actually might be, for me, the sneaky kind of third player in the Houston-Kansas trio there because they've looked great this year, and we know how good Porter Moser is as a coach. All right, now that we're outside of the top 10, we'll go a little bit more rapid fire here. Florida Atlantic, FAU, the Owls, they're 9-2. They lost to Illinois. We saw that game. They also lost to Bryant, which is a horrific loss, but they've also taken care of business against Butler, Texas A&M, Virginia Tech. Coming off of that, they're going to play Arizona on Saturday, so we'll get another chance to judge them there. But so far off of the Final Four run, how are you feeling about Dusty May and the Owls? What's the report card for them?
B- for them. They've looked good, but dropping that game to Bryant really hurts. And then they missed the opportunity to beat Illinois at MSG. Opportunity to jump right back up, though. If they can knock off Arizona, they're right back to A- or really A. I think especially when you consider that they're a mid-major, they're really punching above their weight class. They've looked good, don't get me wrong, but they haven't looked Final Four good.
How about number 19 in the VCI, lower in the VCI than they are in a lot of the human polls? People love this Kentucky team. I think this Kentucky team is good. They've got loads of talent, but they aren't a complete team yet, in my opinion. They could improve under Calipari, of course, as the season goes on. They've got a litany of great offensive players. They're 8-2. They've suffered. They lost to UNC Greensboro. Was that the? Let me see this.
Yeah, they dropped a tough one at home.
UNC Wilmington. Sorry, I had the wrong UNC.
The Seahawks.
Yeah, the wrong derivative of North Carolina there. It was Wilmington, not Greensboro. And they lost that game to Kansas. They played pretty good. They just beat North Carolina a couple of days ago. What's the grade? I'll give them I'll give Calipari team B+. I think I'm surprised a little bit by this Kentucky team, but that UNC Wilmington, for me, keeps them out of the A range.
Kentucky gets a B+ for me as well. Kentucky showed flashes of being a team that Calipari could take to the Final Four, but they've also showed their youth and they've showed their growing pains, especially with that loss to UNC Wilmington. Also, it sounds like everyone we're talking about has a win over UNC. That seems like a pretty common trend.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that in a second because they're going to play my beloved this year Oklahoma squad, who's delivered me, I think, 3 victories so far.
Yeah, they've been a wagon.
Yeah, they have been, and that's going to be an interesting one. Up next, Gonzaga. Gonzaga has beaten absolutely nobody this year. Their best win is USC, who's not that good. They've also barely beat UCLA, who's really not that good. UCLA quickly, that's an F for me for UCLA, unfortunately. They have no wins in the top 200. They beat Syracuse. Syracuse is fine, but what's the grade for Gonzaga? I personally don't understand how they're still ranked in the top 25. But they're going to now win a bunch of games at WCC, and they'll probably end the year at like 10th, but that's not going to make any sense. Well, what's your grade for Mark Few and the Zags?
C-. Like, they're not even passing for me with the C. They've been really disappointing. And you mentioned those wins that they have over USC and UCLA. Those don't even really look that impressive. Again, like losing that game to UW, that's a pretty tough loss. I don't think UW is really even a tournament team. I know they're on the bubble right now. And they're just not passing the eye test. Like, they just don't have the depth and they don't have the talent that they've had in years past.
I would agree with that. Here's an interesting one. A team that was an obvious F coming into Saturday. Tom Izzo. We know March is Izzo season. Shout out John Rothstein. They bounced back in a big way. All the shots that weren't going in started to go in at the Little Caesars gym or whatever it's called there in Detroit. So they win. It's a good win. It bumps them up. They're still number 23 in the VCI. None of their losses. I mean, that loss to James Madison. Obviously, you don't want to lose to James Madison, but also first game of the season, and the Dukes could easily go undefeated at this point. Like the conference they're in is there's a good chance that they go undefeated. They've only lost to Duke, Arizona, Wisconsin, and Nebraska. None of those are catastrophic. They beat Baylor. Now they've got a win over Butler. What's the grade for Michigan State? And obviously, it's got to be bumped up a touch since that Baylor win.
Sparty gets a D+ from me just because of the expectations that they had coming into the season. I think we're grading this team difficultly on the curve, but we had Michigan State up in that top tier with UConn and Purdue and Arizona coming into the season, and they just haven't met expectations or even come close. They get that big win over Baylor. We'll see if they right the ship, but one good performance can't make up for a lot of lackluster ones.
Yeah, I agree. They'll probably pass the class, but it's barely. They're gonna have to do some extra credit. They're gonna have to kind of suck up to the teacher if they want to pass. But there's time for Izzo to maybe turn this thing around. But I agree with you in the sense that the top teams that we were talking about coming into the year, Houston, Purdue, Arizona, UConn, Kansas, all of those teams, Tennessee, all of those teams are still the top teams kind of through this part of the season. Michigan State's the clear team that's fallen way off from that initial batch of teams. And then Duke is the other one. And Duke's going to play Baylor tonight in what should be a really interesting matchup. But Duke's another team. What's the grade for you on Duke? They've lost now to Arizona, Arkansas, and Georgia Tech. And they really don't. They beat Michigan State. I guess that's like their marquee win at this point of the season.
Continuing to grade these teams on the curve from their expectations, C+ from Duke. They've been pretty disappointing. They have, the talk was Kyle Filipowski is going to be the national player of the year. This Duke team's going to roll through the ACC. This is one of the better Duke teams that they've had in recent years, and they just haven't looked the part of that team. The loss at Arkansas, that's a game that a good Duke team goes and wins. The loss at Georgia Tech is definitely a game that Duke doesn't usually lose. A big opportunity tonight going against Baylor. But I think we'll talk about this later. I probably like Baylor in the game.
Yeah, and that's honestly a nice transition. I think we touched on a lot of the teams that came in with expectations to start the year. And as I was just saying there, most of those teams have done a nice job of holding serve, or they're going to go now into conference play kind of as expected. It's Duke and Michigan State for me that are the ones, and Gonzaga as well. To be fair, we didn't know. I think Gonzaga always just gets top 10 ranking. They could have a bunch of high school players on their team and they'd probably start the year in the top 10. But Duke and Michigan State, for me, they had the rosters, they've got the coaching, they've got the tradition, they've got everything they need to live up to expectations, and they haven't done it yet. But conference play comes. Michigan State just picked up that win. Duke's got a chance tonight to maybe flip the switch, and we're still a long ways from March. We're barely a month into the season. It feels like we're years into the season, but we're still in the early days here. Most of these teams have, 2/3 their games left to be played, and then we've got conference tournaments and then March Madness. But on the schedule tonight, 5 compelling games, and there's some other interesting smaller conference games as well. We won't touch on those too much, but the first one we sort by rank here on Vincerix, cbb.vincerix.com. I'll have that available to everybody here shortly. It's Alabama against Arizona. Alabama is just playing a juggernaut of a schedule over the last week. Purdue, Creighton, and now they get Arizona. They were competitive in both of those games against Purdue and Creighton in those ones down to the end. They end up losing both of those. Arizona also continues to play a really tough schedule here. This one being played at the Footprint Center in Phoenix. Is that the Suns Arena?
Yeah, that's the Suns Arena, and it's over, Jim, and the line is reflecting that.
Yeah, we've got 175.5, one of the highest over-unders I think we've seen this entire year. The spread plus 7.5 on Alabama. You can get a -7 on Arizona, and as Hunter just said, 175.5. You can get it under 177 now if you've got access to Circa. So we're expecting an unbelievable amount of points tonight. The stats back that up. We'll touch on those in a second. But out of the gates, what are your thoughts on this one, Hunter, as we get 2 of the fastest paced, high scoring offenses, very similar styles of teams? Obviously, Arizona, the better version so far, number 3 in the BCI, but Alabama, the computers still love them, number 13 in the BCI. No matter what happens, they can't seem to move down. What are your thoughts on this one?
Arizona -7. When you have a game with over-under of 177, -7 feels more like -4, -4.5. Arizona still believe they're one of the best teams in the country, even coming off that loss to Purdue. It's a pseudo home game for them. They have that alumni base in Phoenix. The Footprint Center is going to be rocking. They get the U of A chants going. They're getting out and they're running and gunning. And Alabama's susceptible to the running and gunning. Like Alabama's going to come out and they're going to take 43s. And unless they hit 20 of those or 18 of those, I don't see this going their way. Long rebounds lead to push out opportunities, get Arizona. And Arizona's going to want to look to bounce back. That's just the team that's just who this Arizona team is. This Arizona team's old. This Arizona team's experienced. This Arizona team knows how to win, and they'll be looking to make a statement and get right back on that one line tonight.
Yeah, I'll join you on that -7. And to your point on the 3-pointers, I think the only threat of Alabama tonight covering that -7 is a 40% plus shooting performance on 35 plus threes. I think they're going to get the looks. I mean, if you're looking for an advantage here for Alabama, they obviously shoot a ton of threes. The Arizona 3-point defense hasn't been very good this year. It's 257th in the country. Alabama 19th in 3-point shooting. And Arizona kind of middle of the road in allowing 3-pointers. So Alabama's going to get the looks. They're all going to have to fall for them. And we saw like first half of Purdue game, they all fell for them, and they had the lead against Purdue for most of that first half. What I like for Arizona here is on the glass. Alabama's 32nd in offensive rebounding, but Arizona's number 2 in rebounding on the defensive side of the ball. So all those misses that sometimes Alabama can grab, kick back out for more threes. A lot of their threes come off of second chance opportunities. Hopefully Arizona can slow those down today, and Arizona can, to your point, grab those long rebounds and they're off the other way. And once Arizona has the ball, there is nothing statistically that shows how Alabama would stop Arizona from scoring. Arizona top 30 in effective field goal percentage, 3-point percentage, and 2-point percentage. Alabama outside the top 220 in all of those categories, 293 in effective field goal defense, 229 in 3-point defense, 281 in 2-point defense. Arizona loves to go to the 2-point scoring, drive the lane, get it inside. They only shoot 32% of their shots from 3, so they want to go inside, and it's just an astronomical advantage for them on the 2-point side of things. Alabama fouls a lot. Arizona gets to the line. And another piece of this is Alabama likes to get to the line. They're 37th in free throw attempts. Arizona 12th in defense on the free throw side. So the only hope for Alabama tonight is white hot, toasty 3-point shooting. They can do it. I just think percentage wise, the likelihood of them doing that, I'll take the -7 with you here.
Yeah, Alabama's going to be casting from 3. It's their only hope. And I just like the matchup. When you have one team that's going to be able to go inside and get points in the paint over and over again, and the other team's going to be maybe chasing a deficit, trying to launch threes. Also, just don't underestimate the home court advantage that this game is going to be. This is not really going to be a neutral court game. This is going to be U of A all the way.
Yeah, and we saw that. They played Michigan State. I don't know if it was the same gym or it was somewhere else in the greater Phoenix area, and it was a neutral site game, but it was popping. And this Arizona, they've got faithful around the country. Even so, we mentioned that for the Purdue game, they probably had 20% of that crowd, even in Indianapolis. So this Arizona crowd, we know what they are. They're one of the best fan bases in the country. Alabama's a football school. I'm sure they'll have some people in attendance there, but this Alabama team is going to be interesting to watch the rest of the season. If they drop this one, all of their losses are going to be against teams that are 26. They're better in the country. They haven't suffered any catastrophic defeats, but they haven't yet picked up one of these marquee victories that I'm sure Nate Oates would have been looking for. So they'll be an interesting one to watch come conference play, especially as the computers continue to like them. And I don't see, unless they get absolutely pasted tonight, how they'll drop very far in the computer rankings. So it's an interesting Alabama team, and get ready for some points tonight. There's also that saying, you want to take the overs in the games where the overs are outrageous. So if you're one of those people, it's a shining example of your chance to do that.
Yeah, if it ever feels too high, take it. And if it ever feels too low, take it.
Indeed. So we'll both take Arizona -7 there as our first bet of the day. The next one, this is one that we were texting about. We're going to have to talk through it live here. We've got North Carolina, number 18 in the VCI, coming up against number 14, Oklahoma. This is the second day of the Jordan Brand Classic or Invitational or whatever it's called. They've got last night was Michigan, Florida, and then on the women's side, these teams played, and then I think men's play tonight, and then it's like the flip, women will play after that. So cool little thing that Jordan is doing here. I like to see that. Wish Adidas would do something kind of like that, get the Huskies plus some of the other Adidas teams together. But a cool thing here, it is a semi home game for North Carolina. This game being played in Charlotte. Oklahoma is yet to play a road game. So this is really kind of the first road test for this Oklahoma team, but they have been fantastic this year. They are undefeated. The line here, +3.5 on Oklahoma, -2.5 available on North Carolina, over under in the 154.5 to 155.5 range. My lean here would be Oklahoma, and we've had loads of success on this Porter Moser squad so far this year, but I'm just afraid of teams that are going and playing that first road style game of the year. It is yet to go well for almost anyone.
Yeah, I'm afraid of Oklahoma going. I mean, they're not going to Chapel Hill, but they are going on the road in this game, and it's their first true road test. I wouldn't bet it, but if I had a side, it might actually be UNC -2.5. I think UNC has been on the wrong side of quite a few bets. What is their cover percentage this year?
Yeah, we got a 4-6 on North Carolina and 8-2 for Oklahoma. So Oklahoma's continued to be kind of a little disrespected. North Carolina, to your point, they've been in a lot of these games. You look at their game log here. They beat Tennessee, which is a great win. They won that game by 8 as 2.5-point favorites. They were 2.5-point favorites against Villanova. They lost that game by 2 in overtime, but they had that one and it kind of just slipped through their fingers. They were 1.5-point favorites against Kentucky on Saturday. They lost that one by 4, but they were kind of in that one the whole time. The only game where they really weren't in it was the game we were at against UConn, and they were a few threes falling away from making that one a little bit more competitive. This is where it gets interesting. It's like the statistical side of things just screams Oklahoma. Pretty much every stat is in favor of Oklahoma here. The Oklahoma defense is tremendous, 6th in effective field goal percentage. This UNC team wants to go inside. They own 240th in 3-point attempts, so they want to go inside a lot to Baycott. They want to drive the lane. That's where the Oklahoma defense is really good. They're 33rd in the country in 2-point defense. They block a lot of shots, which is an area where North Carolina gets a lot of shots blocked, and they don't really foul, which is another area where North Carolina wants to score. And they also make you play in isolation. This is a true Porter Moser team. These guys are long and athletic, and there's not a lot of guys on North Carolina that I think of as beating you off the dribble. They've got Cadeau, who wants to drive and dish, and Love can come off the high screen. But I think this Oklahoma defense does match up really well with this North Carolina offense. And then on the flip side, the North Carolina defense is terrible, and this Oklahoma offense is super efficient. 7th in the country in 2-point percentage. They make all their free throws. They rebound. They're 51st in the country in rebounding. So if this game is played on neutral site, or this game was in Oklahoma, this is an absolute hammer job for me on the Sooners. But I think I'm going to just stay away with you on this one, just because it's one of those where I love to bet on the stats, but I totally see the home court situation here. So I'm just going to take my medicine and sit it out.
If you believe that UNC is who they've showed you they are this year, then this is an Oklahoma line. If you believe that UNC hasn't played to their potential and you trust that Harrison Ingram and Cormac Ryan can start playing better, Armando Bacot, quite frankly, has not been playing up to his potential. He looked way better 2 years ago than he's looked now. If you think Armando Bacot can take it a step up, the one really bright spot has been RJ Davis. He's looked good this year, and Elliot Cadeau continues to look more comfortable. Stay away from me. I don't know what this UNC team is. They have a high ceiling and they have a really low floor. And then also just don't know what the home environment's going to be like.
Yep. Yeah, I think this is there's going to be lots of games to bet this year, lots of games to bet tonight. You don't have to bet them all. We don't have a strong feeling about it. I think we like this Oklahoma team. I think long-term, I love this Oklahoma team, and I agree with you. This North Carolina team, they're the type of team that goes into March Madness, could get hot or could just lose in the first round to somebody that they're not supposed to. But they're kind of due after a couple of games here against Kentucky and Connecticut where they played fine, but ended up losing. They're probably due to win one versus this Oklahoma team's had every bounce kind of go their way so far this year. So it's just a scary line. And then you add in that home court advantage, which should be very much on the side of the Tar Heels. And we will see what happens there. But a fun one to watch. And that's honestly why I'm kind of glad to not have a bet on this one. Just watch this game for what it is and see where the chips fall. Next up, this game being played at our home gym. Not right now because we're back on the West Coast, but they're at Madison Square Garden. It's number 17 Baylor against number 16 Duke. Very evenly matched team statistically. We see that just obviously in the 17 versus 16 in the VCI. It's Baylor plus 3.5 here coming off that loss to Michigan State. Duke minus 2.5, over under in the 153 to 153.5 range. We have to note that it's being played at MSG, which is historically an over gym, but I don't think either of us are going to be taking a total in this one.
Yeah, no total for me in this one. Duke plays too slow. The number's above 150. This is going to be a really back and forth game. It's so evenly matched. I like Baylor. I like the Big 12 this year. I like Baylor. I like them to bounce back against Michigan State. And I just haven't seen it from Duke to this point. I know Filipowski is a National Player of the Year candidate, but they still seem like they're struggling to gel. And we've talked about it. We love this Baylor team, and I'm not going to stop loving them because of one poor outing, especially with the amount of threes that Baylor takes. You're going to have an off night every once in a while. I like Baylor, especially in the over gym, for those shots to be falling.
Yeah, and I watched that Michigan State game. They just got off to a terrible start. They got boat raced. They were down by 20 like instantly, and they played fine the rest of the game, but it's obviously tough when you're down 20 instantly. This, like I said, these are evenly matched teams, but this Baylor offense has a big edge against this Duke defense. The Duke defense, 206th in effective field goal percentage, 212th in 2-point defense. And that's an area where, yeah, this Baylor team shoots threes. They're second in the country in 3-point shooting. They didn't fall against Michigan State, but they also love to go inside. They love to drive. They love to get to the basket. And there's a huge advantage for them on the 2-point side of things. They're 37th in the country in twos. Duke 212th. Baylor also offensive rebounds the ball pretty well. Duke does a nice job on the glass, so there will be a battle there on the glass. But I think from an athleticism standpoint, I actually like this Baylor team to be considerably more athletic than this Duke team. Filipowski has struggled against these long, athletic guys on the interior. We saw that against Arkansas, and I think this Baylor team is a better version of what that Arkansas team is, and Duke looked completely out of sorts in that one. On the other side of the ball, pretty evenly matched again. There's to this point on the athleticism side, Baylor's 59th in shot blocking this year. Duke's 357th in getting their shot blocked. So, like, that stat just kind of matches up what I've seen with my eyes of what happens on the interior with this Duke team. I think there will be a home court advantage to some degree for Duke in this one. There's always a lot of Duke fans at MSG, but we think some Baylor fans will travel, maybe head up to New York for the holidays. But in a game where it seems pretty equal, I probably prefer this Baylor team long term. They were just in the top 10 of the VCI. They got hit pretty hard because of that Michigan State result. I think they bounce back. And if you're going to give me plus 3.5 on them in a game that to me is kind of a coin flip or I'd lead Baylor, I'll hop back on the Baylor train. And I'm not going to let that Michigan State result hold me down from riding with them again.
Baylor plus 3.5. They're the more athletic basketball team. They're the better shooting basketball team. And anytime you're giving Scott Drew points on a neutral court, got to like that opportunity.
Indeed. So we'll add that to the Arizona -7. So Arizona -7 and Baylor plus 3.5 for us so far, with a couple more games to discuss. The next two are the Big East games of the day. We saw what Big East basketball is like with that Providence Marquette game. And now we get Villanova traveling to play at Creighton. Big line here. This thing is opened around 6 and it's just continued to climb. You can now get plus 9.5 on Villanova, minus 8.5 on Creighton, over under of 141.5 to 142.5. We just talked about this Creighton team a little bit earlier. We know this Villanova team is just incredibly volatile. The stats here point to a game where if Creighton's hitting their threes, they're going to run away and win this game easily. If not, then this is a pure play Villanova. And we see that in the stats because Creighton is 7th in 3-point attempts. Villanova is 331st in surrendering threes. Creighton is 26th in 3-point shooting, and Villanova's defense 326 in 3-point defense. So I think that's why this line is what it is, because there's a clear edge to Creighton in the 3-point shooting department. Villanova's 4th in 3-point attempts, but Creighton runs teams off the 3-point line. They're 2nd in 3-point attempts per field goal. And then Villanova, the threes just aren't falling, and Creighton's defense has been pretty good against the three. So a big line, but one that's probably just decided by how the 3-point shots fall, at least in my opinion.
How about the over here? Both teams are going to be casting threes. Creighton can shoot the lights out at home. If Villanova's going to keep it competitive, Villanova feels like a team that's always playing in the low 70s, and that number gets you there with it at 141.5. So it'd be the over for me.
Yeah, and I think let's look at how these teams have been right in the middle of the road on their over-unders. Villanova's 5-6, Creighton 6-5. The average over-under for Creighton has been 150. So that does come down here against a Villanova team whose average has been 137.5. What's interesting about this Creighton team is I think about Creighton as like this flying up and down the floor style of team. They're 278th this year in pace. They played a little bit more deliberately on the offensive end, and I think part of that might be they don't have a pure point guard with Nembhard having left. They can't necessarily run the floor in the same way that they have historically. Let's take a few more stats here. Creighton forces no turnovers either. They're literally last in the country in forcing turnovers. Villanova's offense is efficient. They're 46th in turnovers. So Villanova is going to have the chance to set up their offense, try to get into what they want to get into, try to get the ball to Dixon on that kind of post low block, 12 feet out. If he can score, they can also get it to Moore down there. I'm actually, and they also rebound well. So Creighton doesn't do much on the offensive glass. Villanova 15th. This line to me, this is too high. I'm going to take the Villanova plus 9.5 here. This is a Villanova team that has had some good victories so far this year. Like you look at the game log chart. Yeah, Villanova's had some bad losses, but they've also played good against good teams. We saw them go on the road against Kansas State. They could have won that one. They've beaten Memphis, and Memphis is fantastic. We've seen that from them. They beat this North Carolina team who we were just talking about is pretty good. Creighton's only good win so far is that win over Alabama, and that was only a 3-point win. So I wasn't planning on taking it, but the more I look at it, I don't know that these teams are 9.5 point different levels of ball clubs. And yeah, it's played at Creighton. That's a tough environment, but Villanova, let's slow it down. I know you're looking for the over, but I'd like to see Villanova get that ball into the low block. And if you're going to give me 9.5 here, I think I just have to take it.
This will be a game to really see. We've talked about if Creighton's in that upper echelon of the Big East, or if they fall back and they're in that Villanova, Butler, Providence group. And this will be telling. Like, even if Creighton wins, if they win close, there's, that tells me that if this game's in Villanova, Villanova takes it. I like the side, especially with this line creeping up to 9.5. That's a lot of points to give a experienced Villanova team.
Yeah, and if you're Villanova, you're still a tournament team at this point, despite some of those losses, just because of some of the wins that they have. They're 4-1 in quad one games, or how we define the quad one. They just happen to be 0-1 in quad two and 1-2 in quad three. So I like this Villanova team to step up and be ready to go tonight. They'll see this as a chance. If we can go get a win at Creighton, we're right back in this roller coaster season. It's headed back up the roller coaster there. So yeah, let's go 9.5 on Villanova here. That line's just too much for me, and it's one of those where being patient and kind of waiting as it moved up from 6. At 6, I probably would have been on Creighton, but at 9.5, give me Villanova. So we'll be on the lookout for the over and Villanova in this one. Final game of the slate for us, UConn. They're traveling to Seton Hall. I was on the wrong side of a Seton Hall versus Missouri game on Sunday, but I think I'm just going to hop right back on a fade of Seton Hall. I don't think the Seton Hall team is good. I think that was kind of they got hot from 3 and kind of got out in front of Missouri. This line's only -8 on UConn. The over under 139.5 to 140.5. I think this UConn team is fantastic. All the stats here, we've got the red siren emojis everywhere for UConn on the offensive side. I'll take the Huskies here, and I think you like that as well.
I like UConn in this one. Seton Hall, especially with the kids on break, it's not going to be a jumping environment like you see elsewhere in the Big East. And we both think UConn's the best team in the country, or right there with Purdue. And if we really think that, we should be excited for only a -8.
Yeah, and this game be played at the Prudential Center too. It's not even on campus for Seton Hall, so we're playing an NBA arena or NBA style arena where the Devils play their hockey. We've got this UConn team who's just been dominating everybody that they've played. This is obviously a conference game, but they're known for all those 10-point plus victories that they have had in non-conference play. They looking at some of these stats, every single thing just screams UConn. This Seton Hall defense, 281st in assists per field goal, UConn 38th. 3-point attempts, UConn 74th, Seton Hall 318. The threes have been falling at a medium rate so far for UConn. They haven't. Danny Hurley was actually talking about if they can get hot from 3, this team is even better than they have. They're only 164 in the country in 3-point shooting, and that could improve. Not Klingon, but who's the other guy on the wing?
Caravan,
Spencer? Yeah. Caravan, Spencer, Newton. All these guys can shoot. They've been kind of middle of the road in shooting. The 2-point offense, huge advantage. Connecticut number 2 in offense, 2-point offense, 15th in rebounding. Seton Hall 147. So UConn should score infinity points tonight. They may not score 100 because the style they play is they want to get in their sets and get wide open looks on every play. But I think they can get those wide open looks on basically every single possession. And then on the other side of the floor, this Seton Hall team is 310th in 3-point attempts. So their game is let's drive the paint. Let's try to get 2s. That's what they did against Missouri, is they got to the rim and Missouri had no one to stop them. UConn's got guys to stop them. UConn's 6th in the country in 2-point defense. Everything here to me screams UConn. I get this is a road game in the Big East, but like we said, this isn't a true road game in the Big East. So yeah, -8 UConn. I love it.
Yep.
So that is the slate for us today. As I mentioned, some other good games if you're a college basketball fan. UC Irvine, who's number 68 right now in the BCI, is going to play New Mexico, who's number 31. That New Mexico team, they suffered that St. Mary's loss. They were a team that was kind of hyped people at them as a Final Four team going into the year. They're starting to look more like that as the season progresses. Xavier is going to play St. John's, another Big East matchup there. So keep your eyes on that if you're a fan of the Big East. But to summarize, for me, Arizona -7, Baylor +3.5, Villanova +9.5, and those UConn Huskies at -8. We talked a little bit about Oklahoma, North Carolina. Didn't take a side there, but a fun one to bet if you are so inclined. Of these games, Hunter, which one's the one you're most looking forward to watching?
Baylor Duke, just with it being an MSG, that's going to be an exciting game.
Yep, that's one of those where if I was still in New York, I would 100% be going to that one. So yeah, another great slate of basketball tonight. We'll be back with a short video on Friday to preview some of the afternoon and weekend games on Saturday. And we've got some exciting updates to the site coming here momentarily as well. So thanks everybody for tuning in, and good luck tonight as we look to ride the wave of a sweep last night. Probably can't sweep 2 nights in a row. Hopefully we don't get the inverse. The reverse sweep can sneak up on you sometimes when you get a hot wave. But 35-19, let's keep it going.
Yes, sir.